That's right, Elden Ring is easy. It is said that Elden Ring has one difficulty setting, hard. Now that's not necessarily true. While there is no difficulty setting in the game menu, the difficulty of the game is set by our in-game choices. Enter the Astrologer class. The Astrologer class makes Elden Ring incredibly easy due to its incredible versatility in all situations. You can destroy your enemies with potent sorceries from a distance or with high critical melee damage. Let's begin. First things first, we will select the Astrologer with the Golden Seed Keepsake. This allows for one extra Crimson Flask or Cerulean Flask at the start of the game. This is a huge help as it provides you with more health and magic resources at the start of your journey. Astrologers are known primarily for casting potent sorceries using a staff, and as a rule of thumb, the stronger the staff, the stronger the sorcery. However, sorceries require magic to cast, so magic resource management or FP management is a necessity. You can greatly improve your magic resource efficiency by using melee weapons to clear out weak foes, like the trash mobs scattered throughout the lands between. On that note, there are many high intelligence scaling staves and melee weapons that you can find throughout your journey, and finding these weapons is instrumental to the easy mode in-game choice setting. The staff that we will be using throughout the early and mid-game is the Meteorite Staff. The Meteorite Staff has S scaling with your intelligence stat, which means it does more damage the more intelligence you have. However, the staff cannot be upgraded. This means that the only way to improve the damage that you do with the staff is to increase your intelligence stat. Additionally, the Meteorite Staff has a passive that increases the damage done by gravity sorceries by 30%. This stacks very well with the gravity sorcery, Rock Sling, that we will find near the Meteorite Staff. Rock Sling is a very powerful, if not the most powerful, early to mid-game sorcery for the Astrologer's arsenal. Rock Sling is incredibly efficient, costing relatively little FP while doing massive damage with high intelligence and the Meteorite Staff. Rock Sling also does a lot of stagger and poise damage. This will open up many large opponents that don't die in one hit to a devastating riposte once their poise is broken, which has a very satisfying animation and does insane critical damage. The intelligence scaling melee weapon we'll be using throughout the early and mid game is the Moonveil katana. Take note that the melee weapon should be wielded in the right hand and the staff in the left hand. This allows us to use the Moonveil's Ash of War, Transient Moonlight. Transient Moonlight does massive damage to both health and poise for a relatively small FP cost. This should be used when our opponent is too close for us to cast any spells without getting interrupted. That being said, intelligence is your primary damage scaling stat as an astrologer, and this is reflected in their high base intelligence. Since we'll be focusing primarily on intelligence to boost our damage in the early game, we also need to ensure that we have enough stats to properly wield our weapons. Enter the talisman slot. We will use Radagon's soreseal to improve our vigor, endurance, strength, and dexterity by 5 points each. This is the equivalent of 20 levels from one item at the start of the game, and will allow us to wield much stronger weapons than the base astrologer. Finally, we will combine all of this with a 35 level boost at the start of the game. The best part is that this is all part of From Software's game design and isn't game breaking in any way, unless of course you want to play the game under tougher circumstances. In order to set up our easy mode astrologer, we must first visit the Church of Elleh, rest at the site of grace, and buy the crafting kit from the merchant Caelid. The crafting kit is necessary if we want to craft any of the items from the crafting books that we will find throughout the lands between. Personally, I don't really use any of the crafting consumables and instead hoard hundreds of crafting materials and unused items that get lost in my inventory. But if you're into crafting and consumable items to make your game easier, then this crafting kit is for you. The crafting kit is very cheap to buy, so I don't see any reason not to get it. Next, we will head to the Gatefront Ruins, where we can find a map fragment to expand our map, practice our combat mechanics, and collect our very first Whetblade. Whetblades are very important as they are required to augment our weapons with different Ashes of War, status effects, and stat scalings. There are 2 sites of grace on either side of Gatefront Ruins, and once we've rested at our 3rd site of grace, Melina should appear, and this will unlock our Mount Torrent and our ability to spend ruins to level up. If we decline Malna's offer, we won't be able to level up. However, resting again at a site of grace will give us the chance to reconsider Malna's offer. We will next proceed deeper into Limgrave, where we will encounter a voice calling us from the side of the road. We should investigate this voice to find Bach, who is disguised as a bush. Hitting the talking bush will reveal Bach, and talking to him will begin his questline. As with all dialogue in Elden Ring, make sure to keep talking to the character until they start repeating themselves. That way, we will know that we have exhausted all of their dialogue and won't miss out on any interesting quests and lore. We will keep running south until we find a caravan being pulled by trolls. We can ignore the caravan and head up the cliff to find a gold pickled foulfoot that is guarded by a few enemies. We can either ignore or kill the enemies, it doesn't matter. Again, we will continue running south through Limgrave until we encounter an updraft. This will launch us up into the air onto the cliffs above if we jump into the airstream while riding Torrent. If we run onto the rooftop of the ruins, we can find a sorcery book, which will come in handy later. Heading back down the updraft and continuing south across a bridge will get us a stone sword key, which will also come in useful later. On the other side of the bridge, we will find a site of grace. After resting at the site of grace, we will proceed to talk to Irina. Irina will give us a letter and ask us to deliver it to our father in the fort to the south. This is the beginning of the Frenzied Flame quest. It is completely optional, but worth doing if you want to achieve the Lord of Frenzied Flame ending, or want a more completionist playthrough. Continuing south, we will encounter a wagon crash and a chest to loot. Loot the chest to receive the Morning Star Hammer. This is important. Keep heading south until we find the Castle Morn Rampart site of grace. We will return to explore this area later. Use the map to teleport back north in Limgrave, where we will follow the path to the artist's shack. We will collect the painting at the shack and rest at the site of grace. There are a few paintings scattered across the lands between, and we can collect rewards for finding the locations depicted in the painting. We will do this later, but for now we will proceed east across Limgrave until we find Kenneth Hyde. Talk to Kenneth Hyde to learn some lore about Limgrave and accept his quest. Again, we will deal with that quest later. For now, we are just exploring. Continue heading east until we find the Third Church of Marika. Rest at the site of grace, collect the Flask of Wondrous Physic, and the Sacred Tear. We can increase the amount of health and magic that our flasks restore with the Sacred Tear when resting at a site of grace, and we can mix our Flask of Wondrous Physic. However, we don't have any useful tiers for our Flask of Wondrous Physic just yet, so we will ignore it for now. Next, we will venture behind the church to find and use the portal to the Bestial Sanctum in Caelid. In Caelid, we will rest at the Bestial Sanctum site of grace, where Malna will once again appear to offer to take us to the Roundtable Hold. Please note that Malna will always appear at the first site of grace you rest at outside of Limgrave to offer to take you to the Roundtable Hold. We can accept Malna's offer and explore the Roundtable Hold, which will give us more of the game's lore and introduce new characters at this point in time. While at the Roundtable Hold, ensure that you talk to all the available characters so that you don't miss out on any quests. Regularly returning to the Roundtable Hold, usually after defeating a main story boss, will progress the Hold story and ensure you don't miss out on any quests and lore. Returning back to the Bestial Sanctum site of grace in Caelid, we will just run south past all the enemies and stop to rest at the site of grace before the bridge. Continue south past the bridge, ignoring the dragon, and down the hill until we encounter a minor Erdtree. Ignore the putrid avatar and run left around the Erdtree until we see the updraft. Take the updraft onto the cliff and keep heading up the cliff until we find the site of grace. While resting at the site of grace, make sure to spend any unused runes, because we are going to die. We will run through Fort Faroth, ignoring all the enemies. They are much stronger than us, but that doesn't matter if they can't catch us. Don't forget to collect the right half of the Dectus medallion. This will come in handy later in the game. Once we have gotten Radagon soreseal, feel free to die. We will respawn back at the Fort Faroth site of grace. Equipping Radagon soreseal will give us the required stats to allow us to equip the Morningstar hammer that we picked up earlier. This hammer does bleed damage, and that is necessary for our next step. Just north of us is the Elder Dragon Gael. The Elder Dragon appears to be incapacitated by Caelid's Scarlet Rot. This will allow us to freely beat the Elder Dragon with our bleed damage hammer until it is almost dead. Just before killing Gael, we will use the gold pickled fowlfoot that we found earlier to increase the number of runes that we will receive to about 97,000 total. After killing Gael, we will return to the Fort Faroth site of grace to promptly spend all of our runes, spending 1 point in dexterity and all the rest into intelligence. This should put us at level 35. We will now head back to the first step site of grace and head towards the Dragon Burnt ruins. Before entering the ruins, we can rest at the Seaside Ruins site of grace and find the site of the painting we acquired earlier at the Artist's Shack. At the Dragon Burnt ruins, we will run past the rats and open the chest. The chest is a trap, and it will teleport us, yet again, to Caelid. By now, I'm sure we can see a trend emerging. Caelid is a land of fat loot. After teleporting to Caelid, loot the chest and try to escape the cave. The enemies are quite strong, and will kill us in a couple of hits, so we will bob and weave our way out. Once we've escaped the cave, we must rest at the site of grace by the entrance. This is because the chest was a trap, and won't allow us to fast travel until we have rested at a site of grace. We can now head right out of the cave into the Scarlet Rot swamps. Please note that if we run through the Scarlet Rot on foot, we will build up Scarlet Rot that will quickly kill us. However, if we run through the Rot on torrent, we won't receive any Scarlet Rot buildup. First, we will head towards the Street of Sage's ruins and enter an underground cellar in order to obtain the rock sling, Sorcery. We will then escape the cellar, ignoring the enemies, and head to the nearby ruins to collect the meteorite staff. Now with the meteorite staff and rock sling sorcery in our possession, we should head back to the Church of Ella in Limgrave. At the church, we will encounter Renna the Witch. Please note that she will only appear at this church, and only after we have received our Mount Torrent. Renna will give us the Spirit Calling Bell, and this will allow us to summon spirits to help us in certain encounters, whenever we see the summon sign in the bottom corner of our screen. Heading back to the Third Church of Marika, we will once again head around back, but this time following the updrafts up the cliff. We will want to kill the Scarab with our Rock Sling spell to get the Ash of War Sacred Blade, which we will apply to our Morningstar hammer at a site of grace. This will allow us to better fight those that live in death by preventing them from reviving. We will then head west into Limgrave towards Summonwater Village to fight the Tibia Mariner and collect the Skeletal Militiaman ashes. This spirit summon is particularly powerful because it has the passive of those that live in death, the revival passive. This means that the two skeletons you summon will keep reviving in combat until their reviving bones are destroyed. This is so powerful because the game's AI doesn't appear to actively target the reviving bones, so you essentially keep summoning skeletons throughout the encounter until their remains are destroyed. After obtaining the Skeletal Militia Ashes, we will continue heading west in Limgrave until we find the Saint's Bridge site of grace. After resting at the site of grace, we will continue further west until we hear a voice calling for our help. This is the voice of Iron Fist Alexander, the warrior Jar, and he will ask us to remove him from a hole in the ground. he will request a few smacks of his bomb with our big sword, and after obliging his request, he will be free. We can then talk to Iron Fist Alexander until his dialogue is exhausted to learn more about him. This is a very important step for us not to miss, because this will begin Alexander's questline, which will reward us with a very powerful trinket in the late game. Finally, we can look to acquire the Moonveil katana by once again heading to Caelid. Big surprise, I know. More specifically, we will need to head to Gael Tunnel. Inside Gael Tunnel, we will find some smithing stones which can be used to improve our gear. We will also find Alexander, the warrior jar, on the other side of the door outside the boss room, and he will tell us a bit more about himself and where he is going. We must then defeat the Magma Wyram boss, which is weak to our rock sling poise damage. Once we break the Magma Wyram's poise, they will be open to a riposte for quick and easy mana-free burst damage. Once the boss is defeated, it will drop the Moonveil katana, which we should be able to wield thanks to the Radagon soreseal and our 1-point investment in dexterity. This concludes our new game setup guide for the Astrologer class. In the next video, we'll be finishing our exploration of Limgrave in preparation for Stormveil Keep.